So for this game, we essentially have what is a grouping setup. We've got a bunch of cities and a bunch of people, and we have to assign people to the cities. So we can run this with these cities across the top as the three groups that we are working with. Now, the people themselves happen to be F, G, H, and I. Now, it's worth noting that if you were considering running the people across the top rather than the cities, one really good reason to go with the cities across the top is the fact that we are given a very kind of unambiguous spacing setup for the cities. We're told that each city is going to have exactly 2 people assigned to it, a benefit that you're not really given the other way. We're not really told how many times each person is going to go, and generally speaking, the setup that gives you a more solidified kind of spacing setup is usually the better setup. Now, of course, it's worth noting that we have as many as 6 slots to accommodate among the cities and only 4 people, which means that some of the people are going to definitely have to go more than once. Now, we are told that every single one of the people will go at least once, which means we effectively only have as many as 2 extra slots on the board. In other words, if everybody goes once, so we can have F, G, H, I, they're going to take up 4 positions, we basically have 2 extra slots to give away, which means we really could have we can go 2 different ways. We could have a single person take both of the extra slots, which means that they would go 3 times, they would go across all 3 cities. Or alternatively, we can have 2 people each take 1 of the extra slots, which means you could have 2 people go twice. But that's really the only way to distribute those slots for those people. In other words, either we're going to have 1 person go 3 times, or we're going to have 2 people go twice. Next, from there, let's take a look at the rules. So the first rule tells us that I has to visit exactly 2 cities, and that's great because if I is doing exactly 2 of the cities, that eliminates the possibility of somebody going 3 times. That means that we're definitely, the only way that this is going to work is we're going to have 2 people going twice, and one of those people is definitely going to be I. Next, we're told that F and H cannot visit the same city as each other. So F and H certainly cannot be together. Now try to keep in mind that in games where you don't have a lot of people to work with in the first place, when you start limiting certain combinations or possibilities, you really start running out of options. In other words, we can't really do anything specific right now just yet, but if F and H cannot be together, it really limits the kinds of combinations that you could have in any given city. So that's just something to kind of have in mind. Next, if M is visited by G, then Tokyo must be visited by H. So in other words, we can say if G goes to M, then H will have to go to Tokyo. Contrapose, that turns into if H is not in Tokyo, then G cannot go to Manila. So for this one, of course, this is conditional, right? So that only tells us what happens if G is in Manila. Otherwise, it keeps things open. So let's keep going for now. G cannot visit Sydney. So that actually starts making G kind of significant here, right? So we know that G, at the very least, is not going to go to Sydney. But first of all, that actually also restricts Sydney itself, because if G cannot possibly go to Sydney, that kind of raises the question of who could, because we really only have 3 people that remain. We've got essentially outside of G, F, H, and I. The thing is, though, as we said earlier, F and H can't be together, which means if F and H can't be together, you're only going to be able to have either I with H or I with F. There's no other way to do this, which means you'll notice that Sydney currently actually will have to have I assigned to it alongside one of F or H, and that could still go either way. Next, from here, we could arguably then try to exhaust, based on G, because the thing is, we know that if G is in Manila, then there's going to be certain consequences, and the only alternative is that G is in Tokyo, which, to be fair, doesn't give us any direct consequences, but that's still only 2 major possibilities, one of which carries at least 1 consequence, so it might be a good idea to kind of put on the board. So we can say we only have 2 major plays here. Now, in both scenarios, we'll still have to have I with F or S under Sydney, except in one scenario we can say G is going to have to go into Manila. In the other scenario, G will have to go into Tokyo because he has to go somewhere. Now, in the top scenario, if G goes to Manila, we know that H will definitely have to go to Tokyo, but otherwise we're kind of leaving things open. In the second scenario, if G is in Tokyo, I guess that doesn't tell us much because H could still be here as well. We just don't know. It's also worth noting that G in both of these scenarios could still go into the other position. So in the top scenario, G could still go to Tokyo, and in the bottom scenario, G could still go into Manila as well. It's just that if G goes to Manila, then you'll still have to have H in here. So in both of these scenarios, we arguably could still have G on the other side as well. Now, I guess in this scenario, in the first one, if H is in Tokyo, I guess we can take one more step here because it's a minor step, but we can say that F obviously can't go there. So who could go with H right now? I guess that leaves you with either the second I, or you could still have another G there as well. That's still an option because if you put G in here, then the second I could go into Manila, and that would still work, and then this would be seemingly F. But of course, I guess, can't really do anything more specifically here. In the second scenario, this really, in this position, could be anybody. It could be H, it could be I, or it could be F as well. So we'll leave this open and we'll kind of jump into the questions themselves. So the first question, number 17, as usual, is our exclusion question, so we go by the rules. So the first rule here was that I has to go exactly twice. So looking at the answer choices, answer choice A actually already only has one I, so we can get rid of that one. Next, answer choice B has exactly two I's. Answer choice C has two of them. D has two of them. E has two of them. We're good. Next, F and H cannot be together. So answer choice B, that never happens. Answer choice C, that never happens. Answer choice D, it never happens. Answer choice E, however, you'll notice that F and H are together in Tokyo, so that certainly wouldn't work. Next, if G is an M, then H will also have to go into T. Well, let's take a look. Answer choice A, we don't have G in Manila, so that doesn't really apply. Answer choice C, G is in Manila, but H is also in Tokyo, so we're good. Answer choice D, G is in Manila, and H, you'll notice, is not in Tokyo, so we can get rid of answer choice D. And then lastly, between answer choices B and C, G cannot go into Sydney. Well, for answer choice B, you'll notice that G is in Sydney, so that certainly wouldn't work, and that leaves us with answer choice C as the only viable answer for question number 17. Next, question number, 18, 19, and 20 are global, so you know what, let's just leave those for the time being. Let's see what we can do with the locals first. So question number 21 says, if one of the cities is visited by both G and H, then what would have to be true? Well, let's see what we can do. If we have to have a city that is visited by both G and H. Now, it's worth noting that there's actually quite a bit of flexibility here, isn't there? Because arguably, this GH block would be consistent with both of these scenarios. And in fact, the GH block doesn't necessarily even have to go into Tokyo. Arguably, we could have a GH block in Manila as well, couldn't we? In which case, the I could go here as an example, and this would be an F. So arguably speaking, it looks like we have quite a bit of flexibility. That said though, I mean, there's still only two major plays here, right? Either the GH block is going to go into Manila or it's going to go into Tokyo. So you know what? Let's take a look and see what we can do. We'll just split scenarios and see where this possibly takes us. Now in the top scenario, the top scenario, either the GH block goes in Manila or the GH block goes into Tokyo. In both cases, as a rule in the game, we have to have I go into Sydney with one of F or H. Now in both scenarios, I guess we could take one more step, because we know that we have to have two I's, which means that if G and H are together, the I's are going to have to go into the other cities, so that's taken care of. It's also worth noting that in the top scenario, if G goes to Manila, H also has to go to Tokyo, so we have to have another H over here, which means that in this scenario, since we have to have an F somewhere, this Sydney will be F. In fact, let's just kind of rewrite that. Now, in the bottom scenario, well, what do we know? We've already taken care of our two I's, so that's there. F and H can't be together, but frankly, F and H wouldn't be able to go together right now anyways. But we do have to have another F, and arguably speaking, we have a little bit more openness here. So, you know what, let's see what we can do with what we have. The question itself asks, which of the following must currently be true? Answer choice A, F visits Manila. Well, No, that doesn't have to be true. In fact, I mean, it could happen down here, but up here, it certainly doesn't happen. And even down here, you don't have to have an F. You could, you just don't have to. Next, answer choice B. F visits Sydney. Well, down here in the second scenario, you could have an H. You don't necessarily have to have F be visiting Sydney, so that doesn't have to be true. G visits Manila. Well, does G have to go into Manila? No. In this scenario, it looks like we could have somebody else in Manila. Next, answer choice D, H visits Tokyo, and you'll actually notice that, yeah, that does have to be true in both scenarios. No matter what, H is definitely under Tokyo. So the best answer to question 21 is answer choice D. Next, number 22. If I visits Tokyo, well, let's see what we can do with that information. First of all, if I visits Tokyo, that is essentially our second I. Now, again, it's kind of worth recognizing that I visiting Tokyo is entirely consistent with both of our exhaustions. So currently, that doesn't seem to help us too much. But let's see what else we can do with that information. So if we have I visiting Tokyo, what else can we say here? Well, again, in Sydney, we still have to have one of F or H. We can also say that, well, you know what? We're not really allowed to have any more I's. So I is certainly not going to go under Manila at the moment, except wait, this should be kind of familiar because you'll notice that when we said that we're not allowed to have a G in Sydney, we started running out of options of who could potentially go into Sydney. And you kind of end up with a very similar scenario here as well, because if you don't have an I here, it raises the question of who could go into Manila. And we're only really left with F, G, and H, except of course F and H can't be together. They're not really on speaking terms at the moment, which means that you'll have to really have G with one of F or H. So we can actually take this a step further now. We can say this will have to be G and one of F or H, except now, if G's in Manila, we know that H definitely has to go into Tokyo, so that also gets effectively locked into place. And otherwise, I guess we have a little bit of flexibility. We could have arguably a second F or an H here, or a second H rather, and this could be F or vice versa. We could just have them both be F. So we have a little bit more openness here. The question itself, though, asks which of the following now could happen. Let's take a look. Answer choice A, F and G both go to Manila. Well, yes, F and G going to Manila is one possibility that we had. Next, answer choice B, G and I visit Manila. Well, no, we know I definitely couldn't go here, so answer choice I gets disqualified. Next, H and I visit Manila. Could H and I? Well, no, we just said I definitely cannot visit Manila, so C gets disqualified. Next, F visits Manila and Tokyo. So could F go into M and T? Well, no, F at the moment definitely can't go into Tokyo, so that would be out of the question. We can disregard answer choice D. And E, H visits Manila and Sydney. Could we have H go to both Manila and Sydney? Well, not quite, because if you have H here and there, and then we also have H in Tokyo, we run out of F, so there's nowhere that F can go, which means that that wouldn't work. So the best answer to question number 22 is then answer choice A. Next, question number 23 is one of the rule replacement modifiers, so we're going to leave that one be for the time being. Let's take a look at the global questions that we have. So question number 18. Which of the following, if true, would completely basically lock down the game? Well, let's see what we can do. Answer choice A gives us F visits exactly 2 of the cities. So, first of all, if F visits exactly 2 cities, arguably, that seems like it would be consistent. Could that be consistent with both of our scenarios? And yeah, seemingly, in the top scenario, for example, you could place the F in the middle in Sydney and into Manila as well, and then you could have your second I over here. But in the bottom scenario, you seemingly could also have 2 Fs as well, couldn't you? Because you could place the F, let's say, in the middle, and arguably F could go either into Tokyo or Manila. This doesn't seem like it would lock down the game. I mean, you might be in a situation where you might be thinking that, well, maybe I missed something, maybe there's something that we still haven't accounted for, which is always plausible, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like that would really lock things down. So we'll leave A open just in case, but it doesn't seem like it would be a viable answer. Next, answer choice B. G visits exactly 2 cities. Well, first of all, if G visits exactly 2 cities, that's actually powerful because we know that G certainly is not going to be visiting Sydney, right? So G would have to visit both Manila and Tokyo. In fact, we said both of these scenarios could allow for that to happen, but then that kind of means that they might be the same kind of scenario. Let's actually play this out just because G going twice is in fact kind of powerful. So if G goes twice, what does that effectively mean for us? Well, we already know that I, as usual, has to go into Sydney. Moreover, we know that if G goes into Manila, which he is, then H has to go into Tokyo. So we can say that H definitely goes to Tokyo at the moment. Next, what are we told? We are told that, well, we still have to have a second I, don't we? Because I goes always exactly twice, which means that if we have to have a second I at the moment, it's going to have to go to Manila over here. But then we're just left with one element, F, who hasn't really had a turn, which means F is going to have to go to Sydney, which means, arguably speaking, there we have it. If G visits exactly 2 cities, that seemingly would lock down the game. The best answer to number 18 is B. Next, number 19. Which of the following must be true? Well, let's take a look. Answer choice A. F visits. Now, you'll notice that all of the answer choices here have a person visiting a city. So we can actually take a bit of a shortcut here. From our deductions, from our baseline setup, who do we know has to visit what city for sure 100% of the time? Well, this guy right here, right? We know I always visits Sydney. So we can kind of go straight for that. And you'll notice that answer choice D gives us exactly that. The best answer to number 19 is answer choice D. Next, number 20. Which of the following could be true? Let's see what we can do. A, F and I both go to Manila. So could we have F and I both in Manila? We haven't really historically seen that happen as of yet. But in the second scenario here, in our second exhaustion, if we run F and I over here, that takes care of our second I. And this arguably could just still be, let's say, G and H, perhaps. And then you can have another H here, or even another F. So arguably, this actually seems consistent. That seems pretty good. Let's hold on to answer choice A for the time being. Next, B. G and I both visit Tokyo. Is it possible for G and I to both go to Tokyo? Well, we know that in the first scenario, that definitely wouldn't happen. But in the second scenario, if G and I go to Tokyo, that would lock down this position. But then that kind of raises the question of who would go into Manila? Well, we're not going to be allowed any more I's. And wait a minute, if G and I are in Tokyo, that means that there's no way to place the G into Manila, because if G goes to Manila, you would have to have H in Tokyo. So if G and I are in Tokyo, that means that we cannot have a G here, we cannot have an I here, but that kind of leaves you stuck with F and H who are going to have to go there, and that's not going to fly, which means that answer choice B wouldn't actually work. Next, I visits both M and T. Could I go to M and T? Well, no, because we know that I is always in Sydney, and he goes only twice, so he can't go both to M and T. Next, F visits all the cities. Well, no, we know that nobody can go 3 times, and H visits all the cities. Same problem, nobody can go 3 times because we said early on, if I goes twice, we can only make it work by having one other person go twice. So the best answer here is number 20, which is answer choice A. Next, number 23. So the question here is, what apparently would replace the rule that told us that F and H cannot visit the same city? So essentially, we are now trying to replace this rule over here. Now remember, a good answer to a rule replacement question kind of does those two things. It's going to be something that always had to be true, and something that guarantees, rather obviously, that F and H will never end up together. Let's see what we can do. Answer choice A. G and I can never be together. Well, the thing is, this answer choice, is it true that G and I could never be in the same group? And that doesn't seem like it had to be true. I mean, I don't see any scenarios on the board, but arguably speaking, even kind of in this scenario over here, couldn't we have had, let's say, I and G going together in here? Or in general, even. I mean, if this is H together with G perhaps, then couldn't you place G and I and then F goes here? Or hypothetically, this is G and you could have had an I over there as well. This doesn't seem like it had to be true, which means we can disqualify answer choice A. answer choice B. If Sydney is an F, sorry, going the other way, if F goes to Sydney, then H goes to Tokyo. Well, if F went to Sydney, did H have to go to Tokyo? Now, up until this point, it actually does seem like every single scenario where F was in Sydney, we kind of did end up with H in Tokyo. But even if this was true, even if it's true that when F goes to Sydney, H will go to Tokyo, does that really mean that F and H can never be together? I mean, that seems like it's a very open kind of situation, because for one, it only tells you what happens if F is in Sydney. But what about when F is not in Sydney? Now, again, maybe we missed something, maybe we overlooked something, maybe there's a further implication that we're not accounting for, but this certainly doesn't seem like it would have the effect that we need. It doesn't seem like it would guarantee that F and H are never together, when at the very least, the only thing that B is telling us is what would happen when F is in Sydney. Next, answer choice C. So just to make sure. So we're going to leave this one open just in case we missed something, but again, it doesn't seem as especially a viable answer choice. So C, Tokyo must be visited by either F or H, but cannot be visited by both. Now, first of all, does that have to be true, that F cannot be visited by both? Well, yes, because originally we can never have F and H together. That said, though, did we have to have Tokyo have one of F or H? And well, no, didn't we say that we could potentially have had G and I go together here, in which case we didn't really have to have F and H go there? Moreover, the only thing that C would do is stop F and H from going into Tokyo, but we need F and H to never be together, right? I mean, wouldn't this still allow for them to go together in Manila or in Sydney even? Because the only reason that we said that I had to go into Sydney is because we could never have F and H together there. But if we could have had F and H together in Sydney, just not in Tokyo, that still seems like they could be together. Again, this might be a situation where you might be thinking that maybe we missed something, maybe we didn't account for a certain possibility. But again, this doesn't seem like it would have as much of an impact. So we'll leave it open, but it's probably not what we're looking for. D, any city that F does not visit must be visited by H. So does it have to be true that any city without an F must have an H? Well, for one, we said earlier that doesn't quite have to be true, because couldn't you have a city with just G and I? Like in this scenario, couldn't G and I be together, in which case you don't have to have either F or H? Moreover, by telling us that a city that doesn't have F must have H, that doesn't actually say that they can't both be there. It just means that you always have to have at least one or the other. So either way, answer choice D gets disqualified. Lastly, any city that I does not visit must be visited by G. So I guess, first of all, does it have to be true that any city without an I must have a G? Well, the thing is, the only alternative to I or G is to have just F and H, which obviously could never have happened, right? So it was true the whole time that any city that does not have an I would have to have a G. In other words, that every single city must have one of I or G. But moreover, the next question is, does that really guarantee that you'll never have F and H together? Well, actually it does, because if we're told that every single city has to have one of I or G, that if you don't have one, then you must have the other, that means that every single city, one of your positions is always going to be locked out with one of I or G, which means that there would never be an opportunity for F and H to be together, because one of your slots, one of your two slots, is always going to be one of I or G. So answer choice E actually would work as an answer. It gets the job done, it guarantees that you'll never end up with an FH block, and moreover, it's something that always had to be true. So the best answer to number 23 is E.